So for the people that aren't familiar with you, a first time introduction, can you give a little backstory on yourself?
About me? Yeah, okay. So I'm from Newfoundland, Canada, which is why the channel is called Newfie Reactions. A lot of people don't get that. They think it's like New Fire, or they think it's just
Oh,
something
cool.
else. Or I've even had people think it was the dog. The Newfoundland dog is called the Newfie dog. And they
Okay.
come in and they're like, I just watched this whole video. I hit thumbs down because there's no dog in this. I'm like, okay, it's not a reaction channel for dogs, but
Oh my gosh,
whatever.
could you? Do those exist?
I don't know. Maybe I should get maybe I
Imagine
should
that.
get one.
Yeah, for real. That'd actually probably kill it on YouTube.
Yeah, yeah. So, anyways, from Newfoundland, Canada, spent the first like 20 years of my life there, or more than 20. And then I moved up to Labrador, which technically the same province is Newfoundland and Labrador. But there's an ocean in between, and it's like an island compared to the mainland, right? So, but anyways, moved up there in Goose Bay, Labrador. Was there for like, I don't know, 7, 8 years. I'm not even sure how long it was,
Wow,
but
cool.
several years. And now I recently moved to Nova Scotia. I've only been here, Nova Scotia, Canada, for about 3 years now.
Very
But
cool.
yeah. So the funny thing about that is that's why a lot of people, when they see me with the channel, they're like, "How have you never heard the Taylor Swift songs and the Lady Gaga songs and all this kind of stuff?" Right? Okay. First off, I spent like last 7, 8 years in Labrador with. For first of all, I had no internet and I spent no time watching TV. I was just hanging out with my buddies, doing all my nerdy ass hobbies, just being a nerd and doing, working, hanging out with buddies and that kind of stuff. And
That's kind of cool, man.
so, like, people, when they're like, "How have you not heard this song? It was number one for how many weeks?" I'm like, "Because I didn't listen
Sure.
to the radio."
Yeah.
Like, whatever. But
Well,
yeah.
you know what's funny about that is like I have friends that like aren't in the middle of nowhere with no Wi-Fi and stuff, and I still haven't heard a lot of these songs. So like you have a lot more of a reason. You know what I mean? Like yours is actually a legitimate reason. You know what I mean? Like, but that's interesting. That's kind of cool, man. I mean, for a quick sec, let's just talk about that. Like the fact of like no internet. Like what would like that must have been to some degree probably a little freeing, right?
Well, like, I mean, yeah, when I got there, it was like we had the internet, but it was slow at first, and then there was a forest fire, a massive forest fire up there, and then the internet went
Okay.
down for like half the year, like
Wow.
because it burnt everything down. Keep in mind, this Labrador, to where we're from, is just like the little town with like 8,000 people, and then all around it is just wilderness forever, right? So like, and if any of those poles burn down because of a forest fire, then it's like takes forever for them to repair it, right? So it went a long time with no internet, but yeah, but see, but that's it. Small town life. Everybody up there's into outdoor recreation, right? Like out on the four wheelers, skidoos. People,
Yeah.
just the lifestyle, going out fishing. When I first moved there, I was like, so what do people do here for fun, right? Because I came from more of a urban place, like city and stuff, right? But then
Sure.
I come up there, and then yeah, they're just like, well, I don't know. We go to the dump and look at the bears. I'm like, really? So that's your pastime, is to go to the dump
Yeah.
and watch the bears. I'm like, this
You
is
know
gonna.
what?
What have I gotten myself into?
What brought you up there? Was it work?
Well, it's actually my wife's hometown. And
Okay.
after she finished up her university, then she had to get a work, like her first work placement, to find a job. She went everywhere, and that was the only place hiring at the time. And we're
Wow.
like,
Interesting.
it's her hometown, so we're like, yeah, let's go, right?
Interesting.
So, but I was like, oh my goodness, whatever. But it was an experience. But I'm glad to be back in the city now, back in Nova Scotia, big city life here, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's all good.
That's
High speed fiber optic internet.
so. How did you get into reaction videos?
Well, it's funny because it was only like a year and a half ago, I suppose. So first off, we've been working in the aviation industry most of my life. Well, initially it was like recreation, but then I transitioned into aviation for one of the major airlines for Canada, and been doing that for quite a while. But then when COVID kind of first hit the scene,
Mm-hmm.
everything started going a bit crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Slightly before that, I started my channel, slightly before COVID, but I was just goofing around with it. But then, as soon as the world started changing and my job was like, well, people aren't flying on planes anymore. Right. So then I was like, okay, temporarily like let go, like on a leave kind of thing. Like I had paid leave.
Mm-hmm.
And the government stepped in, has been paying me a small percentage of my wage. And I haven't worked at that job. Technically, I'm still employed with them, and I haven't worked with them since, well, it started like a year and a half or a year ago or whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
So, but anyways, to get into reactions was I always wanted to do something with YouTube. Initially, I was going to do something like with my nerdy ass hobbies. Like, well, I'm into like, you might be able to see back there, like tabletop role playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and all that kind of nerdy stuff.
Sure.
And then miniature wargaming, which is where you get the little models, you paint them, and you roll dice at a table with a bunch of people. Like, I'm a huge nerd, right?
Okay.
I always have been since I was a kid. So I was going to get into something to do with that with YouTube. But then I was just like, well, I moved here. Now I got no friends again. So it's kind of weird to get into like a social game, right? With that. So,
Sure.
so then I'm like, what's something I can do? And I love reaction channels, but it was always with rap music because my favorite music has always been rap and rock.
Okay.
And like, so like No Life Shack and Laid Back and Stevie Knight, like all these rap reaction channels, right? They're like big channels.
Yeah.
I always watch them all the time. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to get into one. And then when I first started, I'm like, wait, now I was like, I love rock and rap, but I've never listened to pop music, like ever. And I'm like, so I'm like, okay, well, let's just have fun and do something I've never done before. So I was like, okay, it's going to be a pop only channel. Now, initially when I started, I was throwing in occasional rap song, but that was only like in the first month or couple weeks. But now it's like a strictly pop music only.
Really?
Yeah. So that it's occasionally something might sneak in, like something that's just like an acoustic and a vocals or something, you know, like. But I don't mind doing those. Or I also do a lot of like acapella, a lot of PTX pentatonics.
Yeah.
But you know, a lot of their beats get poppy too. It's right. Poppy is the word.
Sure.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are pop covers.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and I figured, well, why not? Like, that's the whole part of the journey, right? That's why I keep calling it come join me on my journey, because I just discovered it all for the first time. So
that's wild, man.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Did you start getting into like being just doing the pop only for like does that get exhausting in the sense of like, because it's not something you necessarily listen to, like, so for example, like I haven't heard a ton of, say for example, like Bollywood music, you know, and then to say, okay, well, I've heard a lot of other stuff, but I'm gonna only listen to Bollywood now because I've never heard it before. Is that exhausting, or are you like loving it?
Well, I'm loving it, but it's just that pop music is pretty wide. There's so many artists when it comes to like the pop genre. I'm actually to the point now we're trying to classify, is this pop or is not? Like, it's a fine line to find out what's pop, because then there's electro pop, then there's jazz funk pop. And you're like rock pop. You're like, what is this? But like, so I don't, you know, so it's hard to. But yeah, I'm loving it. Like, it's funny because like I've always heard the names like Lady Gaga, Taylor Swift, and stuff, right? And I've seen the occasional Lady Gaga thing or whatever. But now that I'm actually just getting into her stuff, I'm like, man, it's so good. It's like I'm hooked on so many of these artists.